Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode on great MCP servers that you want to pay attention to. Okay, so it's confession time. If you've been following my channel, you know that I've been covering Claude code as well as the Codex CLI. While I've been building many different apps using AI for these past several months, there have been times where I've actually shipped them with zero tests. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. Using AI, you can iterate quicker, but then without tests, you do know that it's a lot riskier. But what if I told you that you could solve all of your testing problems with one single prompt and one MCP server? Well, that's what we'll be covering today with TestSprite. So in today's episode, you'll be seeing the full workflow as I work on two different apps. I'll cover both the front end as well as the back end testing, and I'll even show you how you can actually apply this to projects that are running live on your deployment servers as well. I'd like to thank TestSprite for sponsoring today's video. In addition to having a generous free tier, they are offering a free starter plan for 30 days with all of the latest AI models as well as optimized execution. And if you'd like to get started, head on over on the link in the description below. All right, now without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so for a very quick demonstration of the first app that we're going to be testing, this is the Insiders Club that I run for the subscribers to my channel. And within it, I actually share a lot of pre-development updates as well as exclusive content for my subscribers. Now, most recently, I revamped the entire Insiders page. So let's check it out right now. So I've actually got a test account right here, and this will bypass the magic link so that we'll be able to get in. And as you can see, there's an announcement section, as well as several resources and essential things that I always get people to do, such as submitting their GitHub username so that they can get access to the repositories. Now, generally, when you're creating an app like this, you ought to be writing your tests a lot earlier. And if you've seen some of my other videos, you will realize the importance of doing that. But sometimes when you're using AI, you actually end up building things very, very quickly. And this is exactly what I did over here. So sad to say, I don't have actually a lot of tests that I actually put into this. This is where something like TestSprite can come in and be extremely useful. And think of it not just as a testing suite, but an entire testing and quality assurance as a service. TestSprite really impresses me with how simple it is to get up and running. So let's take a look right here. So after you have actually signed in, the best way to use it is to use the MCP server over here. So if you go to quick install, you will see various different MCP settings for Cursor, Claude Code, and any other IDEs. So for this one, I'll be showing you how this runs within Claude Code. And later, I'll be doing the second project using the Codex CLI just to show you how versatile this is. And the way that you set it up in Claude Code is just this line over here. So I'm going to copy this to the clipboard, and I'm going to make sure that I'm within my project, and then I'm just going to copy and paste this in. And for the API key over here, the way that you do it is that you go and close this, go over to API keys over here. You can just do new API key, give it any name. So I'm going to do TestSprite demo, and then I'm just going to create. You only get one chance to save this, so make sure that you keep it secure. Copy the clipboard, and then you can paste it over here and hit enter. And then you will add this to your local configuration within Claude Code. Okay, and so once you've configured your MCP server, you literally just have to say, hey, help me to test this project with TestSprite. And that's all you need. It's just one shot, one prompt, and an entire testing and quality assurance assessment of your entire project. TestSprite is perfect if you have an existing code base where you've written little to no tests, and it will immensely boost your confidence in what you're building. So let's get right in here. I'm going to copy this and then jump into Claude Code. I've got this running on localhost 5174, and so I'm just going to start Claude off right here. All right, so once Claude has been in here, all I have to do is just double check that my MCP server is connected, and I can see TestSprite over here. I'm going to be using the Sonnet model for this one because there's going to be quite a lot of tool calls and no real need to utilize Opus for this one. So this means it's very accessible. You don't need a Claude Max plan to be able to use this. All right, so I'm going to paste it in over here. Hey, help me to test this project with TestSprite. So several things are going to occur at the very beginning. What it'll do is first of all, assess and understand the code base of your project as the very first step. So you'll look through all the different technology choices that you've taken, as well as understanding the functionality that you've implemented within your code base. And because this is using the MCP server, it will know where to put this summary into such that it will be able to access it later. So as you can see here, I'm just going to open this file and hide this for a second. And you can see here, it's actually come up with an overall summary of your tech stack, the features of your application, and things related to the database schema, as well as all the environment variables and many other things related to your project. And so you can see at a first glance that this is not just some superficial test suite. It actually goes deep into your code base to understand how everything's implemented. But then the real magic comes after here. So what you will see is that when you run this the first time on your project, you will be given this Bootstrapping UI interface. First of all, you get to decide whether you want to test the backend or the front end. We'll focus on the front end here. And for the scope, we do the entire code base. For the test account, I actually have one called tests at localhost.dev. and there's no password because it's using magic links. It is running on localhost 5174. And then over here, you actually need to provide a product specification doc or product requirements doc. Now, you may not actually have one ready to go. You've bytecoded your app back fairly recently. There are many product specification or PRD writers out there, but one way you can do this is just click and say, write me a product specification doc based on my code base. And if you just do this, it will probably give you something that is fairly decent, and you don't have to worry too much about the formatting because code base and give you something that you can utilize in TestSprite. But if you want to take this a step further, I actually have a custom sub-agent defined over here called a PRD writer. And as you can see here, this custom sub-agent is an expert at writing product requirement documents or product specification documents. And this will probably allow you to come up with a much better PRD, which you can then feed into TestSprite. So you can do the same thing here, write a product specification doc based on my code base. So now you can use the same prompt that you used just now, but this time you specify the sub-agent that I have over here. If you're interested in getting this sub-agent as well as other sub-agents that I've done as part of my series, you can check it out in the link in the description below. All right, so once you've got your PRD written, all you have to do is just load it up. I'm just going to find it over here called TestSprite PRD. Okay, and then I'm just going to click continue. And if you hop back into your IDE, in this case Claude Code, it will say that TestSprite is now bootstrapped and ready. And now it's going to take the PRD that you've given it, and then it's going to standardize it. And this is the process in which it ensures that it knows completely what your app is doing, and it will create an internal representation, the specifications of your entire application. The next thing that is done is that it's run this generate front-end test plan. And if we actually pull this up right now, you can see that comprehensive test plan for your app. And you will notice very, very shortly when we look at this in full detail later, it's not a superficial test plan. It actually knows deeply the technology choices that you've taken as well as what the app is supposed to do. And this allows it to be very comprehensive in how it approaches your testing, your security, as well as your functional requirements. I'm just going to scroll very quickly because we'll have a nicer interface to be able to see all of this very shortly. But you can see it's come up with 15 tests that is going to be running against your application. So that's what the front-end test plan is. Now, for the final thing that it's going to do is going to do the TestSprite generate code and execute step. And this is actually the crux of what it's doing. It's not only come up with a test plan for you, but it's actually going to run those tests and then assess what the results are. And what you can do is that you can see this running in progress if you hop back into your dashboard. I have this insider's landing page over here. And as you can see, it's still in progress. Some of these tests have already passed and several of them are running. Like I said, you can actually see all of these tests as part of over here. Everything that you see over here is exactly the same as the test plan that we saw in this JSON file, but this provides a much nicer interface as well as the progress of how it's working towards completing those tests. And the way that it works is that it actually uses something called Playwright, which you might be familiar with. It's a testing framework that is very useful for performing actions against web applications. So what we can actually do now, while this is running, is perhaps take a look at one of these tests. So one of these has already passed, and you can see here it says that the system rejects emails not present in the insiders allow list. The great thing about this here is that you actually have this video preview, then you can actually replay to see how it actually managed to verify it. So it clicked over here, it did some random unauthorized email that is definitely not on an allow list, and you can see that it confirmed that it blocked access over here. And this is just fantastic. You can actually see it uses Playwright under the hood, and you get to see the full code that's generated, as well as a session recording of it running through it. This is a great way for you to be able to have both the code as well as a visual understanding of what went on during that test. So let's just jump in here. You can see that things are progressing quite well. A lot of these other tests have passed, and occasionally you will see a bunch of failures as well. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to let this run to completion, and then we will draw back so that we can see where we end up with. All right, and here we are. You can see that the testing has completed. And what it will do is that it will give you a summary of the various different files that is outputted. We already covered the first three, the code summary that you get, which understands your tech, as well as the different functionalities that your app has. The next thing it does is that it standardizes your PRD. This is not super interesting, so we don't have to worry about it. Then the test plan, which we looked through just before this. And finally, this is the moment of truth, the actual test report from analyzing your app as things stand. So what you can do is that if you open up this Markdown file, you can actually just preview it so that you can get it in a much more readable format. But another thing that you can do is that you can actually see the generated HTML file and then open it up in the browser. And so you'll be able to see it in a much more readable format. And you can see here, right, it's giving you an architecture summary, a summary of the test plan that it has. And then the main issues that it encountered, it gives you a recommendation of any manual steps that you should take. Jump back into the dashboard over here and take a look at this recent run. You will be able to see every single task that has been run against your application. And let's just take a look at some of these failures over here. For example, loading an error states during email verification. So that failed, so let's figure out what's going on. It says verify that there are appropriate loading spinners and error messages during verification failures and network delays. All right, so if you actually watch the video, you can see that it's trying to do a login and log out several times. And what it's really complaining about here is that there's no spinners, right? So most of the time, if you're loading a page, there will be a little bit of a shimmer or loading screen before the page loads, because that is what you want to usually have, especially in the event there's any network connectivity issues or delays. And that's the reason why I actually really like how TestSprite thinks about things. It doesn't just look at the functionality as things stand. It actually has a lens of what a real human tester would be thinking about when they're working with an application like yours. I always like to say that TestSprite is almost like a testing and QA agency in a box. It goes far beyond what you would expect from a testing framework, and that's the reason why I think it's actually very powerful. And so let's actually just take a look at some of the other things that it's looked at. So for example here, there's this root protection on dashboard, and it says that it makes sure that it's protected and inaccessible to unauthenticated users. So if you press play and watch over here, you can see it's not immediately the most obvious, but what it's actually trying to do is that it's going to be accessing a different route. All right, you actually can go into the code, and then you can see that it's trying to access the dashboard before it's even done a login. And the app is actually booting it back to the login screen because the user is not authenticated. So I think it'll be great in a future version to show you the URLs that it's hitting so that it's a lot clearer. But like I said, the description is actually quite good because it gives you a hint of what it's doing, and you can always jump into the code. And the best part is that because you have these failures, what you can actually do now is go back into your code editor and basically say something like, based on the report, fix the issues that were identified. Or if you actually want to focus it on a specific issue, say fix the issue related to not having spinners. All right. And because it already has all of the information stored here in your code base, it's going to have a lot more context about what it needs to fix in order to make that test pass. All right. And you can see here, it's actually started the report, understands what it needs to be doing, and then it's going to go ahead and try to fix this. But I think this is a great workflow to have because as you can see, this test suite that is given to you is a very good foundation because it actually studies your code. It actually thinks about security concerns as well as overall usability of your application. And there are not many frameworks that do it this way. All right, so now we've taken a look at that. Let's take a look at a different example that is slightly more complex. Let me just show you the second application that we have over here, the backend and a frontend as well. And I will be showing you how to do this with the Codex CLI. Okay, so let's just hit on here. So just show you what this is. This is just a YouTube channel analysis tool. And if you've seen one of my previous videos where I actually created a YouTube social proof widget, this is an extension of that where you can actually get an analysis of an entire YouTube channel using AI. All right, so I'll just show you right here. I'm going to paste in my own channel over here and then do a bit of an analysis. So I'm going to click this button over here. So what it's going to see that is going to happen is that it's going to fetch the channel data, and then it's going to look at a bunch of recent videos and its comments, and then it'll perform an AI analysis using the OpenAI SDK. So we can take a look at the result that we have over here. As you can see, it's giving me a pretty positive review, showing me a 200% growth. So he actually talks about why it's giving it explosive growth. It has been 200% increase that is seen. And then it actually gives you a bit of advice of how to continue maintaining this. This is actually a little app that I've been working on in my spare time because I've actually been really interested in understanding how to grow and improve my channel. And I thought that other creators might eventually want to be able to do the same. So the great thing is that it actually talks about the strengths. So there's some cutting edge AI development, as well as some growth opportunities, some highlighted comments from the audience, as well as other community highlights that come through. And you can see there's a bit of sentiment analysis here as well, right? So this one was very, very positive. And then this one is more of a question. So it says it's neutral and there's been nothing negative as well. And it gives you a final review of all the videos that is analyzed at the bottom. And the other things that it does here is that if you sign up and sign in, you can see here that it gives you additional quota beyond the minimum. As you can see, there's a lot more going on here. And so this will be a more interesting use case for us to test. Okay, so we are going to now do this using Codex CLI. And the only key difference that you want to be doing here is that you probably want to be going into your codex.config, and then within it, this is where you want to be specifying your TestSprite MCP server using this format, not the JSON format that you saw earlier. is very similar. It's just a different way of declaring it. In this case, I'm going to be using the dangerous mode, which I've defined here, which gives full access to the system, as well as never prompting me so that I can actually demonstrate this full thing properly. I'm using a tool here that is a wrapper around the traditional Codex CLI that gives me the ability to switch and look at different profiles very quickly, as well as set up things the way that I like. So if you're interested in getting all of this, this is also accessible in the links in the description below. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a CDX, and then I'm actually just going to pass in the profile called danger. And if I look at the status for the sandbox, if I actually show you here, you can see that it never asked me for approval, and then sandbox is for full access. I'm going to check that my MCP server is running. So it is running over here. The other thing that you want to do is that at the time of recording this, this is the latest version of the OpenAI Codex CLI 36. I would highly recommend using the new GPT-5 Codex medium model. Or if you actually want to go a little bit further, you can use the Codex High model. The reason for this is that you don't really need too much high reasoning capabilities over here, and there's going to be a lot of tool calls because of the MCP server. So as a result, you want to use something that strikes a really good balance, and this is actually recommended by OpenAI themselves. All right, so I'll just copy this line that we had previously and just throw it in here. And let's give it a whirl. Okay, so what it's going to do now is going to be very similar to what we saw with Claude earlier. It's going to look at your project, and it's going to first understand what the project is set up to be like, and then it's going to prompt you to bootstrap this. I'm going to do Frontend with the whole code base again. So this is going to be me, and then I have the password over here. And much similar to what I had before, I actually generated a PRD, and you can follow the exact same steps that I mentioned before, but maybe you can use Codex CLI to do it this time. And then it will go through the exact same motions as we saw with Claude Code. Generating a code summary, as you see over here, then it will do the test plan, and then it will go ahead and execute those tests. So let's draw back when this is completed at the end of it to see what the result was like. Okay, so we are back again, and I've jumped straight into the test results so that you can see what the end state is. So you can see here, we have 13 tests altogether, 7 of them passing and several failures. So let's just do the first one that we see. In this case, it says that it verifies that submitting a valid YouTube channel actually results in an analysis that gets concluded. So let's watch the playthrough that we see over here. All right, so it's put in this channel that we see over here, and it's ensured that there's been no errors found, and it was able to actually render the page. So that is working correctly. Let's see how well it handles bad URLs. So if you press play over here, what we can see is that it takes onto here, and then it just puts in this really dodgy looking URL, and then it's invalid. It handles that case very well. So like I said, this test suite is really good because it actually looks into more than just the security concerns or the traditional test, but also all these different usability aspects as well. So let's actually look at another one, and let's take a look at another more complicated example. So over here, it actually checks whether there's an enforcement of the quota. So you can see it actually runs and does the analysis on Fireship, and then it goes back, and then it tries to do another one on my channel. And then after that, it tries to do it again. And because there is actually a limit on the free tier, it's actually not going to allow this to occur. So it's actually verified that this is the functionality as required. And that's the reason why the product specification document is also very useful. Combining it with the code, it gives it a very good lens and understanding of what your application is doing. I'm actually going to rerun TestSprite, but what I'm going to do is that I'm going to test this against the backend because that's something that we've not seen yet. All right, and so what it's going to do is that it's going to understand what this repository is around, and it's really nice to see that it's actually looking at the agents.md file because that's usually what contains the information about the project. All right, and now we are reaching the bootstrapping phase, and we will see this. All right, and this time I'm going to click backend. I'm going to do code base. I'm going to do no authentication required, and then I'm going to pass in the same PRD document that we saw over here. This should pop us back into our application. And in this case, as you can see, because we are doing the backend, it's going to focus on the endpoints. So your traditional HTTP requests like get, post, put, delete, and patch. And then it's going to study all of the different endpoints that your application has. And I think this is really important because a lot of times testing focuses a lot on the user front end. And while that's a really important part of testing, sometimes it's really important to be able to unit test your backends as well, because that's actually where a lot of the business logic of what runs your application is going to be. And it's good to get coverage on that side as well. And TestSprite makes this very easy, as I've just shown you. It actually has support for both backend and front end, so you get to choose. And I think this flexibility just provides a lot of ways for you to get a deeper understanding of how best to make your application more robust and more secure through testing. All right, so you can see it's already done a code summary, very similar to what we saw before, but in this case, it's actually going to cover a lot more on the features that are appearing on the backend. So less about what the user interacts with and the buttons that it will be able to do, but instead it actually looks at all the backend endpoints so that it can actually run tests against those as well. And then now it's going to go into the generate code and execute phase. All right, and you can see this is actually starting to come up on the dashboard right now. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to let this run till completion, and then we'll come back towards the end. All right, and now we are back. As you can see, this has actually completed a lot faster because when you're testing endpoints, you don't have to deal with the interactions and it tends to be a lot quicker. So you can see that several of these things have passed and we have some failures as well. So let's just take a quick look at this one here. The API usage endpoints to verify that people are able to actually request for more and actually analyze more videos is working correctly. And as you can see here, there's nothing to visualize because this is all backend code. So it's actually spooled out the Python code that it then hits the endpoint and ensures that it behaves correctly, working correctly, and that's why it's passed. And we actually can just take a quick look at some of the failures that we see over here. So I know why these have failed because I have actually disabled all of the widget generation endpoints for my app to focus purely on the channel analysis. Let's take another one here, and you can see it says that it's tried to analyze a valid channel and then an invalid channel and then verify the status codes. And initially when I looked at this, I was thinking what might have been going wrong. But then what I realized is that they actually use, all right. And what I noticed over here is that the way that the test was set up was just, and a bunch of these failures over here are actually due to the implementation not being complete. And this is a feature that I know that is actually not working correctly. So it's actually really useful that it's actually thought about it as well. And this is the case of where you start off as an anonymous user and then you sign up. This can only come around by studying the requirements and the specification document, as well as understanding what the code is doing. This is a really, really good example of something that you really want to be testing for because you will have really angry customers if they signed up and they didn't get any credits that they had left over transferred over. In Codex over here, you can see this is the end result. It's actually got all the files for the backend test over here. And as usual, you can either go into the Markdown file and preview it, or you can open up the HTML file to get an overview of the various different tests that it did, as well as the problems that it found, and then how to deal with it from there. And then with that, you can actually say, please fix the TC010 issue. This gives you a very targeted way of making sure your features are matching the requirements. You actually have a test case, it can be reproduced, and then you can proceed on to ensure that it actually already has all the context required for it to know what it needs to do to fix it. All right, so what we've been focusing a lot is how to use TestSprite as an MCP server when you're developing. But not only that, you will actually see that there's a lot of other things that TestSprite is capable of. And so I'm just going to cover one last thing that you can do over here, which is you actually can create your tests for active deployments that you have running on the web. So for example, I would say YouTube analyzer. All right, skip the backend testing for now. I've already deployed this onto Vercel. So I'm just going to pop this over here. I'm just going to call this YouTube comment analyzer. And then, like I mentioned before, we have these test usernames. I'm going to pop in the password over here. Okay, once this is done, it's just going to go ahead and generate the test plan. And everything that you saw when we were running the development server locally is going to be replicated onto the website as well. So the draft plan is ready. And so we can go here and you can see now it's actually created a plan based on the URL. You didn't actually have to put in a PRD documentation because this allows you to actually test things against a running deployment. All of these things here look pretty good. So I'm just going to click next. And here's where the magic happens. This is actually running against your live deployment. So you don't have to rely on things on your own computer. All right. As you can see over here, these are all the tests that are available. And you're going to be able to see the preview and the code once they get done. All right. And then you can see one of this has already been completed over here. So it's actually testing the use example buttons. So it's making sure that when you click on one of these predefined buttons, when it clicks analyze, you can see that it actually produces the performance report. All right, and then we can look at another one over here. And this is the other one where it actually passed in a YouTube channel by URL. And here, the feature that you have in this interface is that you can chat with it. So for example, what happens if you pass an invalid URL? And then down over here, it says that you should ideally handle the error gracefully, such as displaying a relevant error message. And this is a great way for you to actually understand a little bit more about what's going on. So let's actually look at this failure test case over here. And it's wondering why the reset limits is not working as completed. Why did it fail? And it's actually saying that if you actually look over here, I actually had this debug reset limits when you're running in dev mode. And it's actually not going to be running when you're running on a production server because it actually relies on the database, and I believe that this doesn't wipe the database when it's on the production server, only when it's running locally. Alright, so this is the other interface that you have with TestSprite, where you actually run everything in the browser and nothing locally, that you can see over here. And if you've worked with any agencies that deal with anything to do with security, testing, this will be very familiar to you. This is usually something that you would get when you hire an external agency to perform penetration testing, security reviews, or any form of testing. Really, really nicely done. He actually focuses on the failed test that you can see over here, and then he outlines the code that he ran in order to reproduce the test. And while it is true that you have the web interface, it's actually really nice to be able to have this PDF documentation to refer to as well. So that brings us to the end of today's tutorial. I think it's a very well thought out piece of software, and it leverages AI in such a good way. You can see that the TestSprite team has spent a lot of effort into really crafting a system that deeply understands what your app is doing so that it can actually create relevant tests, allow you to reproduce it and analyze when things go wrong, and then act upon it, all using the power of AI. So a really big thank you to the TestSprite team for sponsoring today's video. It has a generous free tier, but not only that, for a limited time, you can actually get this starter plan for free as well. And I think that it will help you to supercharge your overall app development using AI. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Till next time, see ya.